let's say you want to write a poem. The problem is, there are so many words, and you are somehow expected to choose just the right ones. And then there's this blank page you're staring at, and sometimes it seems to stare right back at you, which somehow makes you forget all the words, especially the good ones. But what if the words were just there? Like, just a handful of them, and all you had to do was select a few and arrange them in a way that makes some sort of sense for you. That sounds much better, right? I mean, I hope it does, because that's what we're doing today. So, whether you are looking for a way to add some visual interest to your journaling practice, or searching for inspiration for your next poem, or if you're just curious, grab my hand and let me be your humble guide into the world of found poetry.
They just take words and you stick them together and see if they have any meaning. Some of them do, some of them don't.
A found poem is surprisingly hard to define. Some people, the purists if you will, describe it as a basically unedited piece of text that is found in its entirety and only visually arranged to look like a poem. Others, myself included, prefer more inclusive definitions, which allow for words from a primary source to be moved around, altered, mixed with other words from other sources, and so on and so forth. As nicely summarized in the glossary of the Academy of American Poets, a found poem is the literary equivalent of a collage, often made from newspaper articles, street signs, graffiti, speeches, letters, or even other poems. The task of the poet is then to take existing texts and refashion them, reorder, and present them as poems. So, technically, this here is a found poem. And so is this. And this as well. Why? Because I said so. The best part about all of this is that there are literally no rules, unless you, of course, want to make some for yourself, which can be fun too. So, what I want to share with you today is not some kind of definitive or authoritative guide to found poetry, but rather one of the approaches that I use in my own practice. Often, I already have a theme in mind when I start the word hunt. Like, for example, here, where I sat down to create a page about meeting fellow journalers in my new city for the first time. But then there are other times where I don't have a clear intention, and I basically just flip through my source of choice until I see something that speaks to me that day. This is how I created my first ever found poem, and of course many others since. I would say that both methods have certain advantages, and both can feel like absolute magic. And sometimes, even if I start off with a theme or a goal, I actually end up veering off the tracks if I feel stuck or restricted by what I originally set out to do. The reason I'm saying all this is to really drive this point home. Found poetry is a super intuitive process and can benefit as much from setting yourself strict rules as it can from breaking them. So, with that in mind, let's create a found poem together. Weeks before I had a chance to sit down and actually film this, I decided that it would be cool to try and do a poem about found poetry, not just for this video, but also as a first poem in my new journal. So I guess I had a theme. Past this point though, I didn't script or pre-plan anything, and I just aimed to record the process as well as my thoughts behind it as faithfully and as detailed as I could. Typically, I like to stick with a single primary source, like a single book or a single newspaper, just because I think it looks nicer and it sort of limits me just the right amount. So this time was no exception. I chose my advanced modern practice English textbook that I found on the street. It has been my favorite lately. And when I opened it, I pretty much immediately noticed the phrase that fit the theme. That was really lucky, by the way, and it doesn't happen all that often. It was short, it was to the point, and contained a certain intrigue, which made it a perfect opening sentence. The phrase was, "It's just like music." Or, "It's just music," since like is in parentheses. As you can see, I skipped the parts of the original sentence that didn't sound right, and immediately I had a comparison that just intuitively made sense to me between found poetry and music. I really wasn't sure why, so I naturally asked myself in what way it is like music. That was kind of my next prompt. I needed to find a sentence that would explain the statement that I opened with. As you'll see throughout my process, that's pretty much what my, I guess, approach to found poetry looks like. I find something that has just the perfect amount of mystery, and then I ask questions, which is how I arrive at the thing that comes next. So, in this case, on the flip side of the page, I found just what I was looking for. Or rather, I found a bunch of keywords like structure, gathered, and men. And it took me some time to figure out how to put those together in a sentence. I cut them out to make sure I don't lose them and basically just searched for some connectors to help me tie them all together. Usually, when I find myself with a bunch of words that are not already in a sentence, I kind of keep repeating them to myself in my head until I come up with something that sounds about right. And based on that, I search for the little connector words like prepositions and articles and whatnot that could, help me realize it on the page. It doesn't mean that I write it from scratch. So it's not like, I come up with, I don't know, full words that I need to insert. It's literally just the little connectors because I think just skimming the page without knowing at all what you're looking for can be a little bit overwhelming, at least for me. So yeah, I rehearse them in my head until I come up with something that sounds right. And then once I find what I'm looking for, I can rearrange everything in my little tin. And speaking of which, the little tin, or sometimes a little plastic box, is like a key part of my found poetry setup because I like to take my time, right? I don't glue the words down immediately. I don't know how long the poem is going to be, so I can't tell where on the page I would like to put them. So basically, for me, it makes more sense to collect them somewhere where I can move them around and see how many there are and whatnot, and basically do all the editing before I can glue them down on the page. Just having them float around my desk is an absolutely horrible idea, which I've tried before, and after losing a few tiny connector words that I spent like a while looking for, I basically realized that I don't have to make my life more complicated than it is, and I can just put everything in a little tin, and yeah, it basically saves my life when I'm trying to make something tiny like this. As you can see, I also go back and edit the words I've already cut out. So yes, this part is quite important for the overall practice as well. But yeah, the sentence I was working on here was slowly coming together. For now, it sounded like a structure of blank gathered by men, which again, I it made sense to me and I wasn't sure why at that point. So I still needed one word for it, and it was the important descriptor, right? The stuff the structure is actually made of. That's when the word expectation caught my eye. I didn't know why, but it suddenly made sense. It kind of made me think of musical expectancy, also known as harmonic expectancy, which is this idea in cognitive psychology that explains how the emotions we feel while listening to music are basically directly tied to the expectations we form of the upcoming chords and notes and rhythm, and whether the expectations are fulfilled or not. It's really fascinating stuff, and it makes me wonder if my response to poetry and creative writing in general is driven by somewhat of a similar process. I do wonder if the reason some combinations of words just click for me is also the fact that my expectations are broken in some way, but the sentence still makes sense. So when I'm putting together a poem, it almost feels like I'm surprising myself, which is normally obviously impossible to do consciously. Anyway, I can go on and on about this stuff, so maybe one day with enough research I can do a video just on that. But for now, let's get back to the found poetry process. I felt that the sentence I was working on just needed a little bit more, so I added continuously, which I made out of continuous and ly ending that I stole from a different word, and I looked for something that would go with it. Music is obviously a temporal art form. It literally unfolds in time, and I felt that found poetry is actually not much different. At least creating it isn't. Much like a melody, I have to constantly repeat what I've created back to myself to check if it sounds right, to kind of get a feel for what it's missing. And so I have to completely concentrate myself on this process. When I create, I typically don't listen to music and I don't watch anything in the background because I just find it way too distracting. I think that's actually part of the appeal for me. The fact that I have to stay present and 100% focused, which is so hard to do when there's literally like a million distractions fighting for my attention at all times. So this just feels like a very nice way to ground myself in the moment and to remove all the noise that's normally in my head, around me, you name it. Eventually, I came across some words that actually went with continuously, in my head at least. I found torn asunder and then arranged. And so I came up with a structure of expectation gathered by men, continuously torn asunder and arranged anew. Anew was obviously nowhere to be found. It's a pretty archaic word. I don't think it's used that much. So I had to make that out of scraps of other words, which was, of course, not the end of the world. It's pretty short. I don't mind doing that. But again, this was one of those cases where I found the keywords and then my mind kind of filled in the blanks. And those blanks I had to either look for really hard or just create out of nothing. Anyway, I was pretty happy with how the sentence turned out, so I stuck with that. And the question that I sometimes get is like, how do you know when to stop? You know, like how do you stop editing? How do you know that the sentence or the poem is complete? And the answer to that is like, it just feels right, which is very unsatisfying, I know. But it is an intuitive process, so there's only so much I can actually explain. I knew the poem wasn't complete though. I sometimes like to finish my poems with some kind of call to action, so it feels more like I'm having a conversation with the reader. So when I saw this phrase, quick, let's ... I knew it was just what I needed. The urgency also made sense in the context of the previous sentence, which was all about time and change in time and temporalities, so this was just perfect. I remember thinking at this point that it would be nice to make it into quick, let's witness, which is the word that I have on my journal cover, But sometimes it's just not worth looking for a specific rare word or assembling it from individual letters like I've done before. I only do that when it's really short and simple or when I feel like it's absolutely necessary. Thankfully, here I found a great alternative, which was Explore It, and I decided to complete it with some kind of warning of what would happen if the reader decided not to explore it. This whole found poetry process feels a bit like a dialogue sometimes, and the way I decide on what to look for is basically by asking myself questions as if I was the reader. Sometimes I do just see a sentence or a word that fits before I can ask questions, but most of the time, this is how I kind of narrow down my search options because, again, staring at a page full of different kinds of words and possibilities can be slightly overwhelming, especially if you already have half of the sentence down. So, this is a great way of kind of prompting yourself and continuing the story. Because what is a poem if not a story, right? So, yeah, that was that. I ended up with Let's Explore It Before the Stolen Words Get Lost. The closer I got to completing the poem, the more I slowed down, as I'm sure you've noticed, since I now had a better idea of what I actually wanted to say with it. It wasn't so much writing from scratch still, as it was steering. I kind of knew the direction that I was taking, so I had to get more selective with my word choices, but still I stayed open to whatever my primary source had to offer. And as I completed the poem, it was now time for the visuals. Of course, this is not the subject matter of this video, so I won't be going into much detail here, but I didn't have anything specific in mind, so I just did what I normally do. I picked up one of my favorite newspapers and flipped through it until I found something that inspired me and fit the theme. The only rule I had was that I needed it to match the color of the petals on the page, which is this nice dark violet, like almost leaning towards burgundy. It's really beautiful, but yeah, that was my found poetry process. I hope it wasn't too boring to watch. This is normally the part of my journaling that I skim through in videos when I'm editing, but my goal today was to walk you through the thought process behind it, and I hope I did an okay job. I feel like when it comes to any kind of creative process, it's really difficult to actually explain the choices you're making because the best ones, at least for me, tend to come intuitively. And it's not particularly interesting to just hear someone say that they did something because it quote unquote felt right over and over and over again. So yeah, I did my best to reflect on what I was doing and why. So I hope it was worth it, at least for some of you guys. I know it was fun for me. It certainly made me reflect on the parts of my process that I normally don't give much thought to, such as, why do I choose this word and not the other? What actually happens between my cutting and pasting and gluing? Like, what's going on in there? It's not really something I think about very much, but this was a fun exercise. To be completely honest with you guys, I've procrastinated this video for about a month, if not more. I wanted it to be something special, something different from what I normally do, which is just, your normal process videos combined with some unguided rambling in the background. I don't know if I managed to succeed. I feel like the second part of the video where, I'm doing stuff, the part I'm recording right now is definitely more in line with what I normally do, but the first part was fun to plan out. It definitely took more time, and I can't say I'm entirely happy with it, but depending on whether this video gets a positive response, depending on whether I feel like it, I might of course make more in the future, and I might try and stick to the format a bit more strictly than today. It's definitely a kind of video that I like to watch. this sort of blend of lifestyle and video essay. I don't know if I do it well. I don't think I do actually, because it's my first time trying out this new format, this new blend of formats. But please do let me know down in comments whether you would like to see more stuff like this from me, keeping in mind that it won't be as regular as my usual journaling videos, because it just takes that little bit of more planning and scripting, and yeah, it's a bit more work. But if there is demand, of course I would love to do something like that. I'm not sure it would be only with journaling related topics, because frankly I don't know if there's that much to talk about, strictly speaking, right? If we're sticking to this theme of notebooks and collage and journals in general. But I would love to explore topics that have nothing to do with journaling, and that I just find fascinating and that I love to learn and read about, such as dreams, our mind in general, lots of cognitive psychology stuff, which is, kind of like my academic background. Films for sure, which is another thing that really does matter to me, like the spectatorship, how do we relate to films, how do we understand films, and so on. So yeah, that's potentially something I would like to do in 2026 on this channel. Again, please let me know if that's something you would like to watch. I'm sure that there is something for everyone, right? If you're just here to watch me journal, you can always just, mute the sound and I guess put your own music over it or whatever feels right for you. That's always an option, and we'll see. Maybe one day I will also just make like a full-blown, well-produced video essay with, the little quotes and very thought-through edits and whatnot. But for now, I think I would like to experiment with this blending of formats. So anyway, back to the page. The last thing I did after I put down my little collage elements was to actually glue down the words that have so far just been sitting in the little tin waiting for their turn to join the page. That always feels very satisfying. It's one of my favorite parts because I can finally see everything come together, and it's also nice to just have this dense texture of words on the page. It always feels like a very satisfying conclusion. Actually, the final step was for me to enter the name of the poem into my table of contents, which is something that I introduced into my journal for the first time this year. I just thought that since I'm making this insert into a kind of poetry collection, if you will, it would be nice to have a table of contents, like a real little book. So I called this one Ode to Found Poetry. And with that, it was time to close my notebook and go enjoy the rest of the rare afternoon sun that we got that day. And that's it for today. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you feel like it. And remember to follow me to make sure you don't miss the next video. I hope you have a lovely creative time in your journals. Happy New Year. And I will see you very, very soon.